Hey Wargamers, yesterday Games Workshop dropped a preview over on Warhammer Community of the upcoming Kill Team expansion featuring none other than our very own Tau Pathfinders, and I read that article thinking that they might give us some more details about how the new war gear functions, but instead they gave us something much more interesting, and that is this image here. Now at the end of the article it says that they have a preview of another Pathfinder model coming out, and we'll find out more about this model in the days and weeks to come. But it's pretty clear that this is a Darkstrider. This is the new Darkstrider model that we have been eagerly awaiting and has been rumored for months now. So exciting to see that this is really happening. And it basically confirms that the leaked production schedule or release schedule is just right? That at a minimum, we are getting a Darkstrider model and this new Pathfinder kit. And yeah, so that's definitely happening, right? It's basically confirmed at this point. But I want to spend today talking about this model, what we can discern from the silhouette, and what it might mean for how Darkstrider might come into fruition in this new Codex. Now, of course, compared to the current Darkstrider model, this looks to be much more significant, right? Much bulkier, chonkier, if you will, model. Darkstrider has been hitting the gym, and he brought some friends with him too. So clearly, more elaborate war gear, something that I have always found a little underwhelming about the current Darkstrider model is the lack of, detail in it. This looks like it's super detailed, and he has some little drone buddies. So now the silhouette here is positioned actually in a way that we can discern a fair amount of the composition of this model. Now, I am not an expert in Photoshop, so this is as good as I could do. Please forgive me, but I think in essence, we can see a lot of what's going on here. Either he is standing in front of or behind some piece of ruin, not unlike his current sculpt. You can see that his right leg is kind of sticking out on the side here. We see that he's holding a weapon with one arm and kind of holding a little drone in the other. So like that drone is attached to his fingertips, basically, as if he's releasing it and saying, go forth and do some scanning for me. We can see the aerials on his headset. We can see his structural analyzer in red here. We can see the yellow here is his top knot flowing behind him, just like in the current model. You can see his hair. And then there's a little bit beefier backpack, which I also have in orange in the back here. So really not a lot different in terms of the physical composition of the model, aside from that larger antenna in the back and the addition of the drones. It's just more detailed. It looks like a more sophisticated model, something that has a little bit more heft to it, which is greatly appreciated. Right, and so looking just at that silhouette again, we can see that there are two different drones. They appear to be different. They are not necessarily different. I think the differences in kind of the actual mechanics underneath the dome seem to be suggestive of different drones. And then the one on the right, drone number 1 that I have labeled here, seems to have 3 sensors coming off the bottom of it, whereas the one on top only appears to have 2. Now it's possible that they both have like 4 or both have 3, and it's just the positioning that's slightly rotated in a way that makes some of them line up on top of each other. So we can't necessarily say for sure that these are different, but we can see at least 2 drones here, and they may or may not be different, which is cool and suggestive of some potential mechanics that he may have. We can still see his structural analyzer. That's kind of his quintessential iconic piece of technology that he has. Is one of the things that makes him special. And then we also see that antenna in the back, what I'm calling the transmitter here. And I think that's a really interesting choice in terms of the model composition, in terms of giving it heft, but also, again, interacting with these drones. The drone number 2 is attached to that antenna, right? And we'll talk about that in a minute about what that might mean. It could be, in part, just a aesthetic thing, like they needed a way to attach the drone, and so they put this big antenna on there, but there is an alternative as well. And if you look down at the very bottom, you have to squint very hard, but you can see this little nub sticking out. And you might think that that is a piece of rebar, like a piece of the ruin that he's standing on. But what it actually most likely is the 45-point increase that he's definitely going to get. Now, the two things that make Darkstrider unique right now are the Structural Analyzer and the Fighting Retreat special rules. So Structural Analyzer is that particular headgear that he has, that special piece of war gear, and that allows him to point out weaknesses in the opponent's unit. So it applies to infantry within 6 inches and gives them +1 to wound against a target that is visible to Darkstrider. The idea is that he's using this war gear. He's like, oh, this part of the armor is weak. You need to shoot there. Therefore, you have a +1 to wound. That's a really good rule and useful in a lot of scenarios. So too is the Fighting Retreat special rule, which allows infantry within 6 inches to shoot even if they've fallen back. So essentially, more or less the old version of fly. And so that's something that is, very useful given Tau's, let's say, not so positive outlook on close combat, being able to fall back and shoot. Really awesome. So two very strong rules that deserve a equally formidable platform in the form of a revamped character. So, time for the wild speculation part of this video. We might be able to infer some things about how the new Darkstrider might play based on our knowledge of the current model rules and what we can see based on this silhouette. Of course, he still has his Structural Analyzer. You can see that clearly on the right side of the model. He has the aerials for that. He has the big optical thing on the front. So clearly he still has that piece of war gear and probably will do something very similar, right? So +1 to wound for core units perhaps instead of just infantry. Things are kind of moving in that direction, right? So I wouldn't be surprised if that were the case. If that is, that would be doubly useful, assuming that certain, staple units like crisis suits maybe might be core. If that's true, then +1 to wound for core sounds awesome. Not always the most useful thing for crisis suits, like if they're taking fusion blasters, for example, that having the +1 to wound might not contribute significantly to their overall points efficiency. But if they're taking things like burst cannons or flamers, then that could actually be very, very useful in that context. Similarly, it can be very useful for, the majority of the Tau infantry. So Pathfinders, Fire Warriors, both of those units would really benefit from a continued presence of the +1 to wound, and they benefited from it before, but if they were also included in the core keyword, and that's how this shifted out, they would maintain that benefit. So, nothing too controversial here. I think I would expect this to be functioning largely analogous to the way it does currently. All these other details, though, could either be tech to explain his existing systems, like the drones, the antenna. Those could all be just details that help facilitate those rules, right? Maybe they help explain how the Structural Analyzer works. Maybe they're details that explain how Fighting Retreat works a little bit better. So they could do nothing, right? But they could also have their own special rules. And you generally would think that if Darkstrider is getting a new model, he would also get a souped up set of rules. So what might those be? Well, we know that there are these drones here, right? And they're not the size of tactical drones. They're their own little, helper drones. They're basically a support system that he uses in the field. They don't appear to have any weapons on them, so they're largely probably information gatherers, so providing information on telemetry or optical scans, that sort of thing. So what might they do? Well, I've given it a little bit of thought here, and I think maybe something like using them to ignore obscuring terrain, right? Like if you can send these drones out and they can, find a unit behind a wall, for example, like maybe that's part of their functionality, or maybe they are there to deter deep strike or something. So you can't set up within 6 or 12 or 18 inches of Darkstrider. Both of these would be, consistent with his theme of being an advanced scout, someone that is out on the field really pushing the boundary of the Tau battle line, but also is a Tau from the Tau homeworld, right? So he follows more of the Cao Yun mentality as opposed to the Manka mentality. And so we want to think about him fitting into the Cao Yun approach. So these things, allowing them to shoot through obscuring terrain or preventing deep strike, are both very consistent with that patient hunter approach, where we're not necessarily being super aggressive, but we're allowing the Tau army to exist as a gun line or, bide its time in this Tau Sept detachment. One of the things that I think would be more interesting, though, would be if these drones are able to provide information to, other units. If they are a way that Darkstrider can provide objective secured to other units or boost the objective secured of units that already have it, right? So if these drones are just like really awesome objective or objective information gatherers, maybe they're able to make units a little bit better equipped to hold objectives. I don't know. That just fits in my mind as something that would make sense for Darkstrider to be able to do compared to some other units, and I would like to see that, but isn't necessarily not out of left field either. Maybe I just really want to see that objective secured boost somewhere in the Codex, and I'm taking my shot here. And then the transmitter is the other piece of worry here that's new, right? The structural analyzer isn't new, the drones are new, and the transmitter is new. And so this could have some functionality to it, or it could really just be that aesthetic thing. I said that the transmitter is there, in terms of the model to support that other drone. And maybe that's all there is to it. Maybe they're just looking for something cool to put on the backpack and have this interesting element lifted above Darkstrider to give it some dynamic posing. And that's totally possible. And, maybe even is the most likely outcome. But let's say that this is actually part of his war gear that gives him some new abilities. Maybe the transmitter is part of the drones, right? Like, because he has two drones and they may be different in terms of function, maybe the transmitter is the thing that allows him to control those. And so maybe he has the option each turn of either deploying drone 1 or deploying drone 2, and you have to choose the benefit that you get that turn, right? Like, if we're doing with ignoring obscuring terrain, you're not going to need that all the time. So maybe you ignore obscuring terrain one turn, and then you give objective secured to a unit the next turn, something like that. I like the idea of the antenna giving you a choice and therefore introducing an economy, some strategy into what could be really useful drones. Right? If you can't do both of them at the same time, then that means from a game design perspective, Games Workshop can make those drones a lot stronger because you're not going to have access to both of them all the time. We could also maybe think of this antenna as doing something like extending the range or increasing the power of the structural analyzer or the fighting retreat special rolls, right? Like maybe instead of only applying to units within 6 inches, the antenna allows you to pick a unit within 12 inches that can also use that, right? Like if he's able to communicate better with nearby units, maybe this antenna is facilitating that extra range in a limited basis. Or maybe it's more related to his role as a Pathfinder. Maybe this boosts his marker lights in some way, right? Like maybe this means that marker lights get a stack +1, when they're within 8-10 inches of him or something like that. Or all units within a certain range get +1 to their marker lights. I think that's pretty boring and really encroaches on the Farsight Enclave's bit a bit. So I wouldn't really expect that, but maybe something with marker lights, right? It's possible. And this is all just wild speculation anyway, so why not put it on the list? But those are just some ideas that I have about how this silhouette might suggest some new utility for Darkstrider, some new rules. We will see if any of these things show up. I would hope at least like the multifunctionality of the drones and having those be really important, at least as a theme, would come through. As far as the details about any of these actual functions, who knows? We'll see. But let me know what you think in the comments below. Is there anything that sparks your curiosity here? Is there anything that you think might apply to these drones or that antenna? Put your fan theories down in the comments below, and we will have a conversation. Thanks for watching, and as always, happy wargaming. Hey everyone, thanks for watching. A while ago I made my own miniature, and if you too want to be the proud owner of an Invasive Wargaming model, you can check out the link in the description below. Down there you will also find links for the Invasive Wargaming Discord server and the Invasive Wargaming Patreon. Really, this channel wouldn't be possible without the support of my patrons. Special thanks to Marcy, A Little Pink Monster, Bennaby Jones, Durza, Ever Keller, Robbie Goodwin, Jose Gomez, Ruger, Drew Pratley, Michael Byrne, Zealous Brimstone, Scott Heater, Stephen Cowan, Jared Egler, Chris Kessler, and Tao Oswell.